My name is Dina Glasofer, and I'm the founder of Glasofer Educational Consulting. And I'm really excited to be here tonight and to have this wonderful panel of admission experts who I'll introduce in a minute. And, tonight's really an opportunity. I know many of you on this call are starting to think about private school, whether it's day school, boarding school for your children. And we really wanted to answer some of the questions that might be on your mind and hear directly from some experts. So before I introduce our panel of experts tonight, I'm just going to tell you quickly about myself. I'm Dina Glasofer, and I founded Glasofer Educational Consulting about a year ago. I'm a former admission officer. I used to work at NYU and their business school. I worked at Pingry, and I also worked helping applicants applying to business schools. And over the last year, I've been working with families, helping them identify right fit schools, helping de-stress parents through the process, and also helping applicants strengthen their candidacy. And I have a wonderful colleague, Dale Seabury, who is going to be moderating with me. And she also worked in admission and director of communications and marketing at Pingry. So that's us, but you're not here to hear from us. You're here to hear from our three amazing admission directors. So before we get into the topic tonight, I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves. And if anybody is just joining, if you could just make sure that you're on mute, please. Thank you. So let's start off with Allison Brunhouse.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dina and Dale. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this program tonight. My name is Allison Brunhouse, and this is my 15th year working in admission. I'm currently the Director of Enrollment Management at Gill St in Peapack, New Jersey. Prior to that, I spent 14 years at the Pingry School, overseeing admission for 11 of those 14 years. And in my last role before I departed last summer, I was overseeing admission, communications, and development work. And in a bittersweet turn of events, but one that is also very exciting, I will be departing Gill at the end of this summer and joining Camp Place School in Summit, where I will be the Chief Enrollment and Strategy Officer for their school. So in 3 years, I will be at 3 different schools, but I do plan to stay put in the next few years, and I look forward to this program tonight.
Great. Kyle, I think you're up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Mason. Thank you for having me here tonight, Dina, Dale. This is awesome. I'm really excited. I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment at the Cate School. We are a school in Carpinteria, California that's located in Santa Barbara County. I'm originally from New Jersey, though. Born and raised in New Jersey, attended boarding school in New Jersey. From Plainfield, grew up in Newark, and back to Plainfield, and spent some time at Blair Academy for the best years of my life, where I happily serve as a trustee there. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about anything dealing with boarding schools, the differences, the coasts, all of that. So happy to talk about that. I'm also the head coach of our track and field program here at Cate School, where I've been for 14 years. This is my 19th year in boarding school admission, and 14 of them have been here at Cate, where I live with my wife and my 4-year-old son, Cate, who's just the center of my life, and everything I do is because of him. So I hope to talk about him and weave him into stories tonight where it's appropriate. Thank you for having me.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Dina and Dale, for organizing this event. It's great to see you all. My name is Allison Waldman, and this is my 15th year working in admissions. I'm currently the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at Montclair Kimberley Academy, or MKA, in Montclair, New Jersey, which is a pre-K through 12th grade co-ed school. I'm also a current parent of a son, Archer, who's in 4th grade. And I'm also a proud graduate of MKA, class of 1999. So it's been fantastic and strange all at the same time working at the school from where I graduated. I started my career as an elementary education teacher in pre-K and 3rd grade, and eventually sort of made my way into admissions in 2006 when I began at Dwight School, which is a private school on the Upper West Side of New York City, where I stayed for 8 years as Director of Admissions before coming home back to MKA in 2014. Absolutely love working in schools, especially in admissions, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's program. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to all of you. And I think it's so interesting too that all three of our panelists also attended private schools and independent schools and now are working there. And I think that says something too about just how they feel about education. So before we get into this, just to describe the format of tonight, and thank you for any of you who submitted questions. We really tried to put together some questions that we thought would be of interest to you. So we combined some of the questions into a few different themes, and we'll try to get through any questions that were submitted in advance. If we don't cover your particular question through the slides tonight, hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A, and we'll try to get to those. So one of the big, questions I think in a lot of people's minds, and something I found, I know a lot of the participants on this call tonight are from New Jersey. I know we have a few people from the West Coast and other locations. A lot of families end up moving to a town for the schools, and then find that for different reasons, they're looking for something more. And, they're in a situation where they're thinking about private school and wondering, what's the value? Is it worth it? What's the ROI? I've heard, all of those questions when I worked in admissions. So that's a theme I'd love to hear, your thoughts about. Maybe we could start with, Alyson, and beyond, the obvious small class sizes, what are some of the reasons that you see families are choosing to enroll in your school, and some of the benefits that you see just in general?
Thank you, Dina. I think I can speak for Allie and Kyle as well. This is a question that we're, happy to answer. It's an excellent question, and I'm sure there's a lot of different ways of answering this question. But certainly, as a private school graduate myself, I can certainly speak to the level of preparedness that I had when I went off to college, and can really also say that the relationships with my peers and teachers is categorically different. I would even say life-changing in some ways. Graduates of schools like ours frequently comment that they were, extremely prepared for college. Specifically, we hear in the writing piece and the communication piece, how did I think like a writer? How do I get started? And writing and communication in general is certainly a life skill and something that you'll take with you no matter what you're doing later in life. I think a value of private school is really a lot about the interpersonal piece. So what is it about our programs that facilitate a comfort with speaking to people, having that confidence to share ideas and perspectives? And I think this absolutely translates back to college and sort of far beyond that. And with independent school, I think there's an expectation that, these are young people that will grow into leaders in their respective industries and spaces. And how do our schools have a vision for this? How do we have a vision for this for our students? And I think when you talk about leadership, it can mean many things. You can lead, in your friend group, you can lead as a family member. And I've spoken with many MKA current parents who didn't graduate from a private school, who will often say things like, it never occurred to me that I could, walk into someone's office or walk into the head of school's office and say, I think we should add the holiday of Eid, into our calendar, which is something that's going on right now at our school, or that I have the confidence, to suggest meatless Mondays, to our dining hall staff. And I think there's something in our cultures that really allows kids the ability to say, is there a way I can help make this community better, more supportive, effective for me or for sort of this specific group? So there's a lot of built-in support from advisors and counselors and older peers that really allow for a 360 approach to understanding how a child is doing. And it allows us to have conversations around that all the time. And I think everything else kind of comes after that.
And Kyle, I know in this photo that happens to be you and your advisory, and I know Alyson mentioned advisory, and some of the attendees on this call might not be familiar with advisory. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Right. Definitely. So first of all, I want to say Alyson touched on a lot of points that are super important for people to hold on to and remember. Another one, which is married to the advisory piece, is I like to always say that the main difference, I think, between an independent schools and say a parochial school or a public school or a charter school is time. It's time and how we use it and who we're spending that time with. And Allison spoke to this in terms of the comfort level that young people have with adults after they have an experience at an independent school. One of those things that helps facilitate that comfort and that ease of communication is the advisory system. Advisory systems are like family systems within a school. Oftentimes, an independent school will have a system set up such that you have about 6 to 10 students who are under the purview of one faculty member. And that faculty member acts as their advocate, the liaison between the family and the school. That advisor, there are oftentimes, there are carved out times throughout the week for your child to meet with his or her advisor at their school. There are also times and things that the schools in our communities plan throughout the school year that may incorporate the advisory system. You know, it may be intramural sports or activities. It may be board games. It's a plethora of things, public service days by advisory. There's lots of things you do by your advisory. Advisories are oftentimes mixed ages in which mixed grades. So kids are having an opportunity to build relationships. Again, you're going to hear a lot of that, building relationships, conversations, but they're building relationships with oftentimes a faculty member who doesn't teach them or does not coach them. B, with young people in the community whom they may or may not naturally gravitate towards because you were placed together in this advisory very mindfully, oftentimes by the admission office in coordination with the student dean, the dean's office at all our schools. So the advisory is really, really important. But the one thing that I want you to take away in terms of what I think is the most valuable piece of independent school is the fact that your children are spending this valuable time with really influential adults. You know, and I liken it to like my 4-year-old. My 4-year-old, he's learning and he's things without me talking to him. He's looking at me, he's watching me every day, everything I do, and he's mirroring me. When I'm in this community, I've been in this community for 14 years. And so I've seen a lot of kids, I've recruited them, you've seen them come through, you've seen them leave. They always comment about the variety of different adults whom they were able to kind of like look at, learn from, synthesize truths with it, and then create their own truth or avenue going after high school. And so I think independent schools do a great job at targeting phenomenal masters of craft and then giving us the time to spend with your children in a meaningful way so that they can get more from us than they would at a typical school where at 3 o'clock, we're thinking about going home, taking care of our kids, doing whatever. Like we're at independent schools, we're oftentimes there from 7 a.m. to about 6, 7 p.m. with your kids growing. And I think that's really important to know.
You're on mute, Dina.
Sorry about that. So Allie, I'd love to hear from you too. And, just maybe share a little bit about the sense of community and alumni engagement. I know you've been involved in a few different roles related to those areas too.
Of course, and I echo what Kyle said, and I'll say it again, that I think both what Allison and Kyle said, I didn't want to nod because I didn't want my head to fall off, but I couldn't agree more because all of those things resonate in my experiences with independent schools as well. And I think we all would agree that we never speak about our schools as better than, but I think there's value in an independent school for many reasons. And the opportunity to have be part of an independent school community, I think is very unique. And one thing I've always seen it as is it's an extra, right? You still have the opportunity to be part of your own town community, whether that's through sports or youth programming or whatever that may be. And we're not expecting that connection be cut off. It's an additive to be part of one of our communities. And I do think that there's something very special and unique. And I say this wearing not only my hat as an independent school student, and I feel so grateful that my parents invested in that. I don't think I was grateful during those years, but I, in retrospect, very much am. But I also say that wearing the hat currently as a parent, that I see that my kids have this extraordinary opportunity to be part of a community where there are many different experiences, and there's irony in the fact that in some ways you can find more diversity in an independent school than you might be able to find in your own town. but also diversity, but also then a singular sense of value. I think as families are drawn to independent school communities, they're often drawn for similar reasons. So those shared experiences and expectations, I think, are really, really beneficial. And that community stays with you forever. You know, as Kyle was talking about before the session began, he was sharing that he's coming back east for his 25th high school reunion, and he said it was such zest. And you know, that is that's something that you take with you for life, and that community gives back just as much as you give to it. So if you're in need or search of help, you know, with that first job out of college, or you need to network with that group of alumni, that is there, which I think is a very unique aspect of our schools, and one that we often kind of neglect to talk about because it's an afterthought, but it's something that you then have for your entire life. So I think that the value question is one that I certainly encourage you to think about and search and evaluate throughout your entire process, so that when and if you have an opportunity to make the decision of yes or no, you're not using that month or that 3 weeks or whatever time is allotted. You're using the entire time that you've been evaluating the school or schools that you've been considering.
Terrific. I really appreciate all the different perspectives on this idea of value. And I'd love to hear from each of our panelists a little bit about athletics, the arts, and club involvement at your schools, because that can be something that is quite a differentiator for a lot of families. Maybe you can speak a little bit to the opportunities to become involved in those different areas, and how teachers act as mentors and coaches, and maybe what some of the breadth of offerings are, and how students can find what they're passionate about. So a lot of different angles you could take this to. Maybe Alyson, you could start us off.
I'd be happy to, Dale. Thank you. Love talking about this. And I think at independent schools, the way in which we view the arts, certainly, at MKA, it's just as important as everything else. It is built into the school day, kind of in the same way that other academics are, maybe not meeting as often, but it's given equal value. And I think that's something that a lot of families really appreciate and really look for, that it's not extra, or if there's time, or you're picking up your child from school and driving them to an art class, it's all under one roof. And that's something that, I think is really special and unique. Certainly, at a pre-K through 12 school, it looks a little bit different because we have 4-year-olds to 18-year-olds, but we do have a robust and broad fine and performing arts program, pre-K through 12. And there's things like instruments and chorus and fine arts classes, drama, dance, as they get older, sculpture. And what I really appreciate is that the older you get, the more options you get. So when you're in pre-K through, let's say, 5th grade, everyone does everything. And we really want that to be a very exploratory time. See what you like, see what you don't like. You never know. If you never want to step foot in the dance studio ever again after 5th grade, you don't have to, although they do. So I think it's really wonderful when they're, 4 years old to maybe 10 years old, they're in a rotation. So right now, my son, who's a 4th grader, has done art, music, and dance, and he's finishing the year off with theater. He'll do the same rotation again in 5th. And then when our students get to 6th through 12th grade, that's when they can start making some choices. That's when there's different levels of classes. There's higher level art, there's a choreography workshop as they get older. They can take music lessons after school, but the band meets during the day. And I think something that's really important about our schools is that there's room in the schedule, there's room in their life to do multiple things. And I think that's really important for families to understand, that you could be in the band and you can be in studio art. There's room, you're celebrated for all of those things. So it's not like you're the artist and that's your thing, and you're the musician or you're the athlete and that's your thing. An example of this year is the quarterback of our football team. He's a senior, was also one of the leads in Cinderella this winter. And that happens really often at our school. And I think that says a lot about what we value. One other thing that I'll say about clubs. that when, even when I was younger at MKA, clubs were always an after school thing. And I think at a lot of schools they are, and that's great. We just didn't want students to feel like they had to make big decisions. Do I join a club or can I join a sport? We wanted everybody to feel like they can take part. So at the middle school and the high school, we have club period at the end of the day for high school and during the school day at the middle school. We actually call it flex period. So it's a list about this long, and it allows students to, begin something they've never done before at very low risk. They want to do knitting. They can do, of course, coding, and there's even an ice skating flex if we can get over to the rink. So that's built into the school day. And then at the high school, we have our community service and club initiatives after school. So students feel like they can be a part of many different things. And Dina, I'm smiling at Noah's picture over here. That's Dina's nephew who goes to MKA. So I think all of our schools provide, like I said, a really robust list of options. And the last thing I'll say is that it's really for everybody, whether you're coming in as a 9th grader and you've never kicked a soccer ball before, okay, maybe you'll be on the JV team. If you're someone who's been on the Red Bulls and you want to play at a very high level, you'll make varsity, but there's really something for everyone. At the middle school, A teams and B teams. So it's definitely kind of a roll up your sleeves, come on in when it comes to athletics, arts, and clubs.
Thank you so much, Allison. And Kyle, you brought your background A game tonight because you don't even have to say any words. You're showing us the breadth of offerings at Cate School, but please share a few words if you would.
I thought, I was hoping it was okay just to kind of flip through, because pictures speak 1,000 words, and I think the philosophy that all of us kind of try to follow, whether we're boarding schools, whether we're day schools, whether we're on the East or the West Coast. It gets back to to people. Most of tonight is bringing it back to people, right? We want our young people to have the opportunity to engage, problem solve, forward think, and be teammates on many different levels in many different ways. And so oftentimes at independent schools, particularly at boarding schools, I know this happens a lot. I've worked at boarding and day. Oftentimes, we don't cut from teams, and depending on the size of the school, oftentimes schools under 500 students, they're not cutting people. And so your kids have the opportunity to go try something, not do well at it, mess up, realize, wow, I didn't really like that, but I learned something. And I supported a bunch of other people in a common goal, right? We planned it, we executed it, and we succeeded. That's what it's really kind of all about, supporting the community. Within that, our communities we offer a breadth of things, like everyone said, like so many things. I mean, from martial arts to ceramics to kayaking. I mean, I'm in California at a school on the shore, on the ocean. So we've got the water stuff and the surfing and the wakeboarding and all of that. So it's kind of like, you got to talk to your child, have a family meeting and say, hey, listen, how do we want to grow over the next 4 years? How do we want to go from good to great? And what do we want to do that? In what areas do we want to do that in? And look at what's at your disposal. Independent schools are going to offer you, as Allison and Allie both spoke to earlier, they're going to offer you everything in one-stop shop. And one of the beauties of that is you don't have to drive around New Jersey, fighting traffic, figuring out what to do. And if it's a boarding school, you actually have even more time because you have the whole day. And so you can kind of stretch that out so that kids are not worried about, starring in the musical and running in the Santa Barbara County Championships on this Saturday, which we're having an issue right now because the musical is behind on some stuff. I got a relay that just won Russell Cup last week, and we got to run on Saturday. So it was a little bit easier for me to say, hey, listen, I'm going to meet you guys early. You go off to musical rehearsal. And then tonight, we're going to hit this track again and make sure these handoffs are smooth and make sure we don't make a fool of ourselves on Saturday. But you can do that when you have time, right? When you have that time. So I think that's the value again. And I'm talking too much, so let me stop.
That was fantastic. Thank you. And Allie, maybe you want to speak to Pingry where you were, or Gill St. Bernard's where you are, or Kent Place where you were going, just in terms of the extracurricular opportunities and how you view them. Oh, you're on mute.
I caught myself because my computer told me that's a nice, if only the early stages of COVID 2020 had built that feature in, we could have saved ourselves a lot of year on mutes. In any event, yes, I echo everything Kyle and Allison have said, but I also just think about as we think about our children, and you think about the fact that your children are spending more time in schools than they're spending in their homes. And certainly if they're at a boarding school, a whole lot more time. I think about the fact that we want our kids to be part of safe spaces, but safe spaces that challenge and encourage, and places where they can try things without fearing being laughed at or taking a risk and that not being okay. And certainly I have so many extraordinary moments, both as being an adult and watching and being so proud of young people that aren't my own, but also getting to see the kids in our school communities just be so supportive of one another. And this year at Gill, as I was learning the community and getting to know it, I watched a lot, and getting to see in one particular assembly where the robotics team had just won a national, it was the junior chess team had won a national, they placed like 8th in the nation. And as they were being honored in assembly, our nationally ranked boys basketball program was sitting next to each other. And, these are boys who are going off to Georgetown and Duke to play NCAA basketball. And they were cheering the loudest in that auditorium for that team of chess players. And I don't think that's unique to Gill St. Bernard's, but I do think that's unique to independent schools. And I think that is something that is so special. But it's also about finding a place where your kid can be their whole self and do so and have their hands in so many different aspects of a school community without it creating conflicts or without it creating an identity that isn't okay. So that is what I would add to the wonderful things Kyle and Allison have already said.
Great. Well, thank you, all three of you. There's so much in there. And one of the themes I kind of picked up from all three of you was just at each of your schools being able to not be pigeonholed and just do one thing. And I think a big part of that is because of the design in the schedule. And I think having, whether it's, time to be able to do your homework or not having at each class every day. And, again, that as a big value. I'd love to hear, maybe Allison, you could talk a little bit about, what the schedule looks like at your school and, how that helps students be able to, do lots of different things.
Happy to. And I think at the end, we were going to talk a little bit about like, what's your advice? And in fact, my advice would be, when you go visit schools, ask to see the schedule, ask what it is, why it is the way that it is. If there was one perfect schedule, everyone would use it. So it really has to be the schedule should reflect what the school cares about and how they respect and value their students. So I never thought I would talk about schedules so much in the work that I do, but it's actually really important because it should, like I said, it should really reflect what your school values. So every school does a little bit differently, but I'm looking at sort of the list here. And I think most of our schools will sort of check these boxes. Back in the day, MKA had 45-minute classes back to back every day, no drops. That's the MKA world that I was in back in the 90s. And it was rough because you just didn't get the breaks. You didn't have the time. Speaking of, right, what Kyle said, time, it really does come down to time. We did not have the time to really dig into the material, nor did we have time for your brain to kind of marinate in the information that they just had. And then you were just moving on to the next class. So about 15 years ago, our head of upper school at the time was doing his dissertation on levels of student stress. And he found, looking at the data of MKA, that stress was up. Classes were meeting every day. It was just too much. So over about 3 years of research, he came up with a new schedule. And it was the idea of this block schedule where we went from 45-minute classes that met every day to 75-minute blocks. And every day a class, you'd have about 3 classes a day, and the classes meet every other day. So if you had English, math, and science on Monday, you wouldn't meet those teachers again until Wednesday. So it essentially gives students 2 nights to do their homework. And it also gives them that buffer day in between to go see teachers, which is also built into our schedule. So it has been transformational for our school. Levels of stress are down, grades are up. And in fact, our middle school adopted a sort of middle school version of that with 55-minute classes not too long ago. And it's been really successful. So I think having those buffer days has been huge. And again, having that opportunity to have FaceTime with your teachers is so incredibly important. We have built-in time at our school called Common Work Period, where it's about 20 or 30 minutes once a day. It's sort of like a structured study hall / office hours. And it really allows students to be self-advocates, to go see their teachers, and no academics are being taught at this time. So it really is this time of like, how do I want to use this 20 minutes? Do I want to start my homework? Do I want to read? It's not a time for play or socializing. So it really allows students an opportunity to kind of figure out how they want to organize their time. And most of the time we are encouraging them to go see their teachers. And I think, at least when I went to college, I was really used to that. I was used to advocating for myself. I wanted to seek out the relationships with teachers. And a lot of my peers who maybe had a different experience than I did just weren't as used to that. So it took them a little bit more time. So I could talk about the schedule forever, but I think those are some, important aspects. I'm sure Kyle and Allie have a lot more to add.
Great. Allie, I know just in your experience too, being at a school where start times were pushed back to, could you talk a little bit about that and just, how that factors into?
Yeah, I guess Pingry's schedule, during my time at Pingry, I lived through a kind of 18-month overhaul of the schedule, similar to what Alyson described. And then the years blend together, especially after the last two. But I guess it was 3 years ago that the start time of the middle and upper school schedule was pushed to be 8:30 rather than 8 o'clock to acknowledge kind of sleep cycles. So I do think that schedules, they'll continue to evolve. That's the other thing. They're not a static thing. And certainly at Gill, there's been a variety of different schedules, and there's been learnings through COVID and also through preferences of talking to students. This year, the upper school schedule at Gill, all classes meet on Mondays, and then there's a variety of different schedules that run Tuesday through Friday, which is an interesting approach. But I do think just the thoughtfulness of student-centeredness is what schedules are built around, right? And seeking to try to best serve students, which, as Alyson alluded to, there's never going to be a perfect one, but I think there's a great deal of thoughtfulness that goes into ensuring not only that there's enough time for teaching and learning, but also enough time for absorbing, recharging, and also for spending time with friends and or visiting with teachers. So that then certainly in the middle and upper school years leads to students being really well prepared to be really strong self-advocates when they head off to college and university. They often are able to help their friends along because it's all normal to them in terms of what they need to do to be great students in the classroom.
Well, that's terrific. Kyle, you started to touch on this, I think, a little bit before in terms of the benefits at a boarding school where you are when it comes to available time. So I'm sure you're going to want to expound on that a little bit, but to broaden it at first, I had a friend just the other weekend ask me the question that was asked by one of the participants in this call, which is, why should parents consider boarding school? Can you talk a little bit about what residential life looks like and what makes you so passionate about being at a boarding school?
Definitely. So there's a lot of questions there. I'm going to start with the first one, which is why should a family consider a boarding school, or why would you consider a boarding school? And it's a super easy question to answer, because you shouldn't be considering that for your child. Your child should be coming to you saying, hey, listen, this is something I want to do. Unless you're looking for a different type of residential experience. If you're looking for a residential experience that is leaning more towards mental health support or some type of traumatic situation they have to kind of move through, and you want a therapeutic setting, that's a whole different conversation. But if you're talking about a top tier, tier A independent school in the United States of America, then you likely should be having your child should come to you. In my 19 years of doing this work, what I can say, what I do know to be true is every super success story that I have It began with a child coming to the family saying they wanted to do this, and the family saying, whoa, what are you talking about? So number one, the child comes to you. That child comes to you oftentimes because they need something more. There's not enough time in their given, they're not able to use their 24 hours in their day in the ways that are going to allow them to dive into and benefit from all the learning that's around them, right? They oftentimes might be misunderstood in their communication in school. Maybe they're reading and synthesizing things on another level that their current educational setting can't speak to. They can't sustain that and take it further. They may be talented in a way that they need a setting that's going to allow them more time, to use more time in their day to hone that skill or to focus on that activity or that talent or that passion. Those are some of the low-bearing fruit as to why a child would consider boarding school. Another way is if someone comes to you. I didn't know about boarding school when I was 12, 13 years old, but someone came to where I was and explained what the opportunity was and say, hey, we're looking for young people like yourself. And then I went to my parents and said, hey, listen, this is a good opportunity. I want to check it out. So that's usually how it starts. Boarding schools are, to sum that all up, why you would say yes is because I feel that, and this is not just me, there's a New York Times study done about 5 or 6 years ago, where they said the indication of an adult's success between the ages of 18 and 24 is directly related to the amount of positively influential face time they had with adults between the ages of 12 and 18. A boarding school, and there's no feelings in this, but boarding schools measurably give your child more face time with a large variety of positively influential adults who are masters of their craft. There's no other educational product or setting that delivers that. Not to say that one is better than the other, but that's why boarding schools will work for some families, is because that's what they're looking for. They've gone to the community, they've met with a couple of key adults, they see eye to eye, their child's going to hear their voice through those adults, and their child's going to be able to grow in all those ways without the driving time, without the having to worry about eating dinner. No, everything's there. There's a dining hall. You can talk to your teachers at 9 o'clock at night if you need to. I got 3 kids staying at my house Friday night because we're leaving at 7 o'clock Saturday morning for a track meet. Like, that happens, right? On a Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock at a boarding school, your child is oftentimes going to be with one of those faculty members watching a football game, baking cookies. Maybe they're just babysitting my kids so I can go out and spend some time with my wife. That's cool too, right? We have the opportunity at boarding school to be that example that your adolescent child gets to follow and look and take notes after. And what that does to us is that keeps us in check as adults, because we know that we're constantly being watched. And that's a beautiful thing for those of us who want to be in that setting and have that reminder 7 days a week, 10 months out of the year, 12 months out of the year, that we are being watched by these young people, and we must set a phenomenal example. All different examples, yet all wholesome and good examples from which your child can then synthesize their own truth about who they want to be. I think that's why you would consider it.
You got at the philosophical underpinnings really, really well there. Let's go practical. What did the weekends look like at a boarding school?
Right. So practically speaking, getting back to the schedule piece, I will say most independent schools, day and boarding, are going to work on the same yearly schedule, meaning our family weekends are going to be somewhere during the month of October, maybe this first or second week of October. Our holiday breaks are going to all be around the same time, and we're going to get out relatively for the summer and spring break around the same time. That's why prep school and independent school kids, boarding school kids, they're usually on spring break, and public school kids and parochial kids are not. So that's from the macro level. In terms of the day-to-day scheduling, it's very much like a day school in terms of the block scheduling and having time, flex periods, music blocks, things of that nature to see and do what you need to do. Where boarding school changes is that 7-day, we have kids for 7 days. So oftentimes at a boarding school, you're going to have some semblance of Saturday community gathering, whether it be school, whether it be art lessons or what have you, or all athletic practices, whatever it is. Oftentimes we use that Saturday in a meaningful way. Many East Coast schools will have Saturday classes every weekend or some type of Saturday engagement. Many of the California schools will not. As a matter of fact, Cate School is one of the few schools in California that adheres to Saturday classes. We have Saturday classes twice a month, so it's every other week. And oftentimes that Saturday time is used for labs, art classes, things where you're going to need a little bit more than our 60 minutes that we give them during the Monday through Friday. Often also on the weekends, there are athletic competitions. And so Saturdays are big days for athletic competitions. And so we're driving places. Saturday evenings, there's always an on-campus activity and an off-campus activity. We always get to choose the kids' options. The on-campus activity looks like everything from board game nights to video games outside of a building, you know, with a sheet dropped down and a projector screen, to dances. And you know, they turn the squash courts into like an EDM dance halls and things of that nature. And these are things that you're going to find at most boarding schools. Like that's not unique to California. Boarding schools, we utilize our time in these ways. In terms of the evenings, Monday through Friday evenings, those are feel like, you know, a typical day at a boarding school, you wake the kids up, everyone's pretty much up by 7 o'clock in the morning, no matter what school you're at. At Cate School, we're up by 7 and we're doing chores at 7 a.m. I can't say every school is going to do that. That's something that's unique to Cate School. We have every person in our community has a chore. They do their chore from 7 o'clock to 7:30. They're at breakfast. 9th graders have to sign in for breakfast at most boarding schools. Not everyone, but majority of boarding schools, 9th graders are signing in for breakfast at least through family weekend, which is like October 15th to 20th, somewhere around my birthday every year. That's when, and so after that, usually the school eases up on the breakfast sign-in, usually. After breakfast sign-in, they go to class. You have classes until about 2:30, 3 o'clock, depending on the school. Athletics happen between 3 and 5, somewhere therein. And then at a day school, they may have meetings and things scheduled afterwards. Same thing happens at a boarding school. You don't have to go anywhere. The meetings are happening. But then where it gets different, that 7:30, 8 o'clock time where oftentimes everybody's going home, we're at boarding school. Now we're starting study hall. So we have, most boarding schools are going to give your kids 2 hours of concentrated, focused study in their dormitory rooms. If they can't handle it in their room, we have a study hall set up in some classrooms. At every boarding school I've ever been at, that is usually the case. Somewhere between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., there are 2 hours that schools will set aside for study hall. And then usually at every school, by 11 p.m., everybody has their lights out. Oftentimes seniors don't have any lights out because they're seniors and we're preparing them for college. And that's the same at Blair, Lawrenceville, St. Paul, Choate, Hotchkiss, Cate, Thatcher, you name it. I don't really know many schools that have senior lights out unless it's therapeutic or something like that. Did I catch a lot, Dale? Did I get it? I'll try to get it quick.
You had me at chores. I love that. Can you dispel maybe a few common myths that you have heard about boarding schools?
There's so many. I think that's because it starts with the fact that people don't understand all the time what the difference is. You know, there's a big difference between a Blair Academy and a school in the middle of a very beautiful therapeutic setting that has tons of mental health counselors and that are etched into the kids' schedule every day and things of that nature. So I feel like, how do I say this? When you're looking for a school, like you have to have that conversation with your child at the house first, you know, and as a family, like who are we and where do we want to go? And then you look, schools are like people. Every school has a different personality, especially boarding schools, because we live with each other. We do everything together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, weekends. And so you've got to make sure that you're meshing with that community. I think that's the most important thing. We're all going to teach, you know, we're all going to have our kids read the Iliad, right? We're all going to have, you know, our kids, you know, have opportunities to be orators and speakers and communicate really well. The question is, who's doing that with your child, right? What human being is doing it? And do you trust that human being, and can you communicate through that person or those people? And I think I may have gotten a little bit away from your question. I apologize for that, but that was what was on my heart and mind. So can you repeat the question, the original question?
No apologies. No, I wondered if you wanted to dispel any myths that you have heard. And I think you got at something very important there. Maybe to make sure that we don't let the Allysons fall asleep because they have some other things to say. Maybe you could speak a little more to who what type of student would benefit most from the boarding school experience? I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, it should be someone who comes to their parents and initiates it, but maybe you want to go a little bit further.
Yeah, in the event that they don't initiate it, you're looking for a young person who academically right now, school might be, they may describe it as easy in their 13, 12, 11-year-old mind, right? That might be how they are communicating right now. They may have exhibited or demonstrated a talent that is out of their age group. They're playing up, they're drawing or singing or performing up, or they're really the top of whatever group you have them in. They're kind of capped out. That's a great candidate for an independent boarding school, particularly like ours, because what I can promise you is that they're going to arrive at that community and they will be challenged. They will find other kids from all over the world who are just like them and better than them, which is wonderful, right? They will have an opportunity to study Japanese, which I can tell you right now, they don't have the opportunity to do that at many schools, because we know why we create all of our schools. We create our offerings for a reason, right? We offer Japanese because Chinese is popular. We offer that too, but we know that not many schools are offering that. And so we have a full Asian studies program. So kids are going to get turned on to things that they didn't originally think they were going to be turned on to. And if you have a child who's eager, who's curious, who's intellectually curious, right? Who you feel like you can have conversations with, and you're like, wow, you're just not like the normal 12-year-old. You might want to look at some communities and see how that child can be pushed. That might be something you want to consider.
Great. Thanks so much, Kyle, for all that information. My brother actually went to boarding school. And one thing I remember from his experience was that he had friends from all over the world and all over the country. And that, to me, and just learning about different cultures, and that was a big part of his education. And thinking too about who's in the classroom with you, I think is something that a lot of families do value. So kind of switching gears now, talking a little bit about DE&I, and if anybody's not familiar, DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes you'll see DEIB and belonging. I'd love to hear maybe, Allison, you could talk a little bit about just DEI at your school, more maybe on a philosophical level, and how that's incorporated into the education of your students.
Happy to. Thanks, Dina. At MK, we actually switched from calling it DEI to calling it diversity and inclusion and anti-racism. So that's what we are calling it now. But I think when we're talking about diversity, there's diversity you can see, there's diversity you can't see, and diversity work is never done. It is not something where you can just check off the box and say, we're diverse, the end. I think our schools have a real responsibility to prepare students for a society that's growing, more complex and more global. And I think we all know that students work their best when they and their families are seen and known and, really truly accepted for who they are. And the students play a vital role as our schools really strive to be a place that disrupts racism and is inclusive of all identities, and evaluates, what school culture is, and looking at programs and policies really with an equity lens. So I think our schools have really created structures that allow students to grow as leaders, to give feedback to the institution, and not just our students, but our parents and our faculty and our alumni as well, and to really ensure that our schools are indeed equitable. I think it's also important when you're talking about diversity for schools to really look at their curriculum to ensure that it reflects all students' lives, and really creating that multicultural curriculum is really more than just changing curriculum and its content. It's more of a mindset. I mean, I think it's active, it's ongoing, and it's actually a curricular practice that I think teachers can really engage in as well, because it kind of goes both ways. I think it begins with teachers identifying their own biases and then sort of designating units of study in honor and are relevant, to the students whom they're teaching at that time. So it includes discussing real world issues, designing assessments, that are grounded in student voice, And certainly, I think we can all relate, just providing opportunities for students to learn from one another. I mean, there's nothing better than, being on a tour with a family and walking into a classroom and just being in the middle of this conversation that maybe wasn't part of the plan, but a student had a fantastic question, or they're, reflecting on a show they saw or an article they read. And I think some of the beauty of, independent schools, really going back to schedule too, is having that flexibility to press pause on one thing and continue, or, go in a different direction and have these really meaningful conversations where students are, bringing in their ideas and their perspectives and their questions, and learning to have really respectful conversations, respectful disagreements with one another. And those are one of my favorite moments, of school, is walking into classrooms where you were like, wow, this is a real conversation. This may not have been planned, but sometimes those are the best ones. So I think there's so much you can say, but I think really all students should see themselves represented within the curriculum and course resources. And I think it's important to honor students' narratives and to provide students opportunities to understand themselves, and in turn, they will be successful and feel like they are a part of a place, because at the end of the day, they're with us at schools more than they're at home. So it has to be a place where they feel safe. And I think certainly for us, when we onboard over 160 new kids every year, pre-K through 11, first and foremost, it's just feeling good about where you are, having familiar faces when you walk in, and then everything else comes after that. But really, first and foremost, it's about creating, that safe environment where you really feel seen and known by your peers and teachers.
Great. Thank you, Allison. And I'm curious to either maybe Kyle or Allie, in terms of DEI work from a faculty and staff perspective, because I do think that what people teaching your children are learning too filters down. So I'd love to hear maybe a little bit about how that's handled at one of your schools.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'm sure, as we have for all questions, other than the boarding school questions, but Kyle, I have to say I was really engaged and intrigued to hear all that you had to share about the value of a boarding school. So thanks for educating and illuminating me this evening. But it's, having just been through a process of updating my resume 2 years in a row after not having touched it for nearly 14 years, I thought a lot about where DE and I fit on my resume. And I came to realize that it wasn't a bullet point on my resume, because that would be the same as putting, I use Excel and Word really well. DE and I is part of all that we do as educators, and all that we should do in all of the things that we do. So I think our schools have, and as Allison alluded to, all schools and all individuals are on different journeys and different paths, and those paths, there's never an end point. But I think I'm so proud that our school communities don't just make this about one day of professional development and growth and move on. It is certainly an aspect that is highlighted during professional development days, but it's part of a daily conversation. And it's about, as we think about the fact that we all make mistakes. So it's about being part of communities where you can be held accountable when you might harm somebody else, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and really getting our young people to appreciate the value of variety of perspectives. And I've often said, you might not always agree with everything your classmates say or do or believe, but you can hold space to learn from them and to step back and listen, which I think I've also, as an adult, had a great opportunity to be educated and learn and grow in my own ways in this area. But I think it's about, I think in all of our schools, it's a priority that is not going away, and I'm proud and happy about that. And I think that it's something that certainly is a value both in the hiring process, but also throughout a faculty and staff's journey and commitment to a school to ensure that there's professional growth and development, and that there's time dedicated to continuing to evaluate and evolve and to continue to be on that journey of learning. And I think as we, as adults in schools, I think I often reflect on the fact that I still get to learn, right? And in many kind of quote unquote other jobs, because sometimes our work doesn't feel like a job, but it is a job, right? But we have this opportunity to continue to grow, which I think is a special gift that we do have as grown people.
All right. Thank you, Ali. I'll just add to that. First of all, I think both you and Allison mentioned some really, really key things that I'm not going to repeat for our time. What I will say is I really appreciate how independent schools, we have the opportunity to put this DEI-JB, however you want to acronym it, we have the opportunity to put this work in the forefront in ways that other school communities don't, because we don't have much red tape to jump through. And I feel like the articulation, the passion, and the gusto behind, especially our foot soldiers, our teachers, our administrators, the people in the school every day with your kids, the energy behind our hearts, by and large, is in the right place. And I'm proud to be a part of independent schools who are putting this work forward in the right way. And I will say, I'm also proud to be on a board and a part of other boards that hold that as a priority as well. Because while many of us foot soldiers who are in the schools every day doing the work, while we are passionate and articulate and can push things forward in the moment, it is the power of those who are driving our communities forward. It is what they believe and what they support financially, right? What they put dollars behind is what really is going to last and impact your families and future families. And so I think as discerning customers, if you will, I feel like you should definitely look at who runs these schools, who hires the heads of school, who's hiring the dean of X, Y, and Z, who is putting forth the motions to secure funds for certain programs and faculty chairs and department things like that. Look into that, because that, while the daily schedule tells you what the teachers and the academic dean values, the board and their mission, their charge, that tells you where the school's going and where they are today. And that is really important, particularly as it pertains to DEI work, because you're talking about experiences, lived experiences. If you don't have, if people who have lived similar experiences are not at the table planning the party, it doesn't matter who you invite to it. You can invite me to the party, but if I didn't help you plan it, I'm not equitable, that part is. So I would say, look at the board, look at the alumni association. Let's see what's happening with this community that we're going to invest our most precious, the most precious and important thing in our life is our child. And we're going to put them with these people, like Ali and Allison said, for about 8 hours a day, or if it's a boarding school, 10 months out of the year. I would say, look at the board and see what they've deemed as most important and what they put money behind.
Well said. And I will say that I can wholeheartedly agree with many of these sentiments, having worked at an independent school for 13 years. It's an area where I grew so much as a person and as an educator. And I think it is a real differentiator. As we've talked about so many different differentiators of independent schools and just the value of independent schools, we cannot not touch on some admissions advice, even though it is the plan for Dina to host another one of these webinars to really get into the nitty-gritty, likely this summer, about the process of applying to an independent school. But since we have 3 admission directors with tons and tons of experience between them, Allison, maybe you could talk just a little bit about how you see is the best way for families to determine what school or schools are a good fit for their child?
Sure, Dale. It's a big process and it can be really daunting. So I think it is very important, depending on the age of your child, to really consider, what is their ideal school? It's actually a question that I'd love to ask the kids when they come in to visit. If you can have like the perfect school for you, like what would that look like? And to really list, it could be, gym, it could be an amazing art program, it could be a diverse community, whatever it is. I think it's really important as a family to really think about, if I could just create that perfect school, what would that be like? Understanding what like the deal breakers are or the deal makers are. But at the same time, fit is it's an interesting word because it can mean so many different things. So I think keeping a very open mind is extremely important. Thinking about things like location. I have never been asked more about transportation, in the 15 years of just like getting to school, understanding what kind of community you want to be a part of. A lot of parents will, sit down in our conversation and ask about parent involvement. And in turn, that lets me know what they care about. So I think it's really important to show up, to a school visit, to an interview with, just certainly an idea of what you want, but to really have some questions ready to go, because it is absolutely a two-way street. And I think that's a really important thing for any family going through this process to understand. It has to be a good fit for you and your family just as much as it has to be a good fit, for us as a school. So it can definitely be a daunting process, but I know, I can speak for all of us. We love what we do. I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I know Allie and Kyle also love what they do. It certainly comes through in everything that they're saying. And we love our schools. We love our communities. And we know the types of students and the types of families, who find success in our communities. So it's important for all of us, to kind of be in it together.
Helpful. And Allie, maybe you could speak a bit to this mysterious thing for a lot of families, and that is, how are students evaluated? And especially for younger students who are applying to maybe the elementary grades, how does that work, and how are decisions made?
And I just applied for my rising first grader and rising fourth grader to attend a new school. And I will say I got to live it this winter. And I didn't like not being in control and having to talk myself off a ledge. So I will say that I think just realizing that you can only do what you can do. And what you can do is have fun, enjoy no matter what stage and age your child is, enjoy celebrating them, but also acknowledging they're not perfect, because I think finding ways and areas that you're hopeful the school might challenge or grow them, I think allows that school to best serve the child should they enroll. Be thoughtful, but don't write a novel. I'll never forget my older brother, who I've had very little value to him for my nearly 40 years on earth, until he was applying to an independent school for his 4-year-old. And he sent me a copy of their essays. And you would have thought my niece was 99 and had lived a full life, and I had to say, back off a little bit, So I think be realistic. And if you have the ability to be working with such experts like Dina and Dale, rely on them, use their expertise, and really just have fun, because I think this process should be about exploring where your child might go, but also where your family might fit, because our schools are enrolling your children, but they welcome and are excited about your participation as community members, which will look different if they're 5 or 18. So as much as you can, just enjoy it. And there is certainly, depending on the schools that you're applying to, some decisions are hard to explain, because it's about the number of applications for the spaces available. In other cases where schools have more flexibility with enrollment, there might be spaces, but the school is always seeking to ensure that the school is a good fit for the child. So know and trust that the decisions are always in the best interest of your child, because we want to see and enroll successful students, whether they're 3 years old or 14 years old. And it's an art, not a science. So our decisions are imperfect in many ways. And ironically, it was always the kids in my time that we placed on the wait list that kept me up at night, because I just wondered what that puzzle would have looked like if they were enrolled versus the ones that were. But it all works out. And I just, if you're committed to independent school for your child and your family, I would just encourage you to explore a wide range of schools, because there's no guarantees in this process. But it's certainly a great opportunity for your family to have some really rich dinner conversations, and for you to think about what makes you proud of your kid.
Very helpful. Thanks. And Kyle, Dina and I frequently get asked by parents, what should we not do or say? And of course, we have a few answers and pieces of advice in that area, but we would love to hear maybe a few of yours.
Well, number one, I would say for all of our application processes, you should not live vicariously through your child in this application process. Okay, like Allie and Allison both spoke to, if your child's a finished product, we have no job. Okay, we understand that he or she, they're not a finished product. They're 3, 4, 5, 11, 12, 13 years old. Okay, we understand that, and we embrace that. And all we're looking for you to do is for you to embrace that, and then let us know how you want them to grow. Oftentimes there's a parent questionnaire as a part of the application. That part's for you. The student questionnaire is for your child. And we are very seasoned at reading 12 and 13-year-old writing from the top to the bottom. And there are certain ways of synthesizing the world that a 12-year-old should not be there. And that might be the thing that makes them not a fit for your school. If you're there, then you're not a fit for this, because we're trying to get you there, and maybe you find another place, right? But we can definitely tell when the parents have had way too much influence in the kid application. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say not to do is please do not send us any more recommendations than we asked for. You know, give it a shot, send 15 or 20, let me know how that works out for you. It might work. In my lived experience of almost 20 years now in independent admission, I haven't seen it work. And so I think that's something to consider. Another thing I would not do, I would not listen to and this happens when I worked at day schools a lot. I would not listen to the local peanut gallery, whether it's in Bedminster, Princeton, Short Hills, Far Hills, you name it. Don't listen to the local peanut gallery. What that means is the local parents who may or may not have gotten their children in and around the years that your child is getting in, they will cause you immense amounts of stress. Their information is oftentimes not very truthful or clear or complete. And you should focus on the admission office you're working with, your child, and like Allie and Allison said, is this the right fit? Is my child going to be celebrated in this community in the ways that we need them to be celebrated so they can be their best self? So those are, I guess, the top 3 things I would say avoid.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was super helpful. And yes, I know Dale and I do have a lot of tips that we like to hand out around that. And I know I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know we went a little bit over, so understanding if anybody needs to jump off, no worries. But there was one question I'm hoping we could just get to, and that came up about financial aid. And Dale actually used to be director of financial aid at Pingry. Is there financial aid for independent schools, and what's the process? So Dale, if maybe just really top line, you could just give a little bit of information about that. Thank you.
Yeah, our 3 experts could speak for hours on this, I'm sure. So I'll just keep it high level and say that it's my understanding that most independent schools offer need-based financial aid. And there are a couple of different assessment tools that most schools use. So there is an application in almost all cases, and that involves quite a bit of sharing of household financial information, from income to assets to different debt and expenditures. And it's a very vulnerable and sensitive process, but one that does have certain standardization as a part of it. And I would just encourage anyone who feels that they want to pursue financial aid to read about each school's process early. Go on their website. Schools list a lot of information, and reach out with any specific questions that you have. The earlier you do so, the better. And then be prepared to go through a detailed process and really sort of open the vest of your family's finances in the interest of giving that school enough information so that they can allocate needed funds to your family. And so if they determine that your family has a demonstrated financial need and that applicant is one who is admissible, then they will seek to meet that need. And it can make such a huge difference in your family's life, in your child's life. So, reach out early, be ready to follow a detailed process. And if you have further questions, just generically about this, I would be happy to dialogue with anyone via email afterward.
Great, thanks. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I don't know, Allie, Allison, Kyle, if you have a few more minutes or if you have to jump off. If there's any other questions from our panelists, anybody who's here, if there's, we have this amazing panel. If there's anything that you'd like to ask, feel free. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. And if not, then that's okay too. So again, thank you so much. I know we covered a lot tonight, and I hope that everybody found it helpful, and hopefully you learned something new. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to be having another webinar in probably June timing. That's going to be a much deeper dive into the admission process, talk more about how the holistic process, timing, testing. We'll have a test prep expert. So everybody who's on this call, I have your emails. I will send you information about that. In the meantime, if you do have any other questions, you can follow up with me and Dale. My email's on the screen here, dina@glasoferconsulting.com, and you can visit my website with my contact information. And I just want to thank everybody, thank our panelists for being here. I know you all are so busy, and it's just the end of your busy admission season, and you probably can't even start thinking yet about the upcoming cycle, because I know how much work it is. And to Dale, thank you so much for helping me, and to all the families too who are here, who are embarking on this process. I just want to emphasize that it might seem stressful and there's a lot to think about, but hopefully through this journey, whatever happens, you will hopefully learn about yourself, you will learn about your child, and there will hopefully be moments of fun and enjoyment and some discoveries. And that's part of what Dale and I love doing with our clients, and really just getting to know students. And sometimes parents will come to us like, wow, I didn't know that about my child until we went through this process. So, really just keep in mind that, this is a process, and your child will be okay in the end. And hopefully you will discover something new about them. And again, thank you everybody for being here tonight. And yeah, thanks again. Good night, everybody.